Good morning, everyone. It's just after 9:15, which means it's time to get started. And we've got a lot to get through today. 12 different books of the Bible. Thankfully, one's only 23 verses long, so we'll be fine. Actually, we're only doing 6 today, and we'll pick up on 6 next week. But yeah, we've been doing this series on the prophets. We've got our St. John's Bible here to guide us with some pretty illuminations of these different texts. And so we're moving into now what are the minor prophets. So we've had the major prophets that have come up. So name them for me. Come on. There we go. There we go. Jeremiah, Daniel, Malachi. No, that one's today, but that's okay. So yes, those are the main 4 right there. So good work. Now, this term I think is confusing to folks versus major versus minor, and I often it does not necessarily apply to importance because it's not saying that these 4 major prophets are better than these minor prophets. It's really talking about the volume of their work in lots of sense. So we have the major prophets because they have substantial amounts of written things for us to look at. Isaiah's 60 verses or 60 chapters long. Jeremiah's in the 50s. Daniel is significant as well. I can't remember Ezekiel right now, but looking at the minor prophets, I mean, the largest, I think, is maybe 7 chapters. So we've got a significant reduction in size. And so they're the minor prophets because they've kind of been lumped together. So think of a time when the scrolls are being written out, and you need multiple scrolls for these major prophets. A lot of what we understand of the minor prophets and why they are kind of lumped together in the way that they are, because it really doesn't make sense for them to be put together like this, because if you look at this handout that I've given you, they're all over the place. We're talking about, a 500-year difference between when Obadiah is writing and Malachi is writing. And so why are they in the same sort of group? Well, it's because their writings are so small that on these scrolls, or at least the thought process is that part of preserving the writings of these meant that they were grouped together. And so we're entering into what is sometimes referred to as the Book of 12, the Scroll of 12. So it is these 12 minor prophets that have less in terms of volume, but no less in terms of the prophetic witness that they bring and the prophetic nature for which they call to people. And so that's important. So let's look at this. Let's look at our little handout here. I was going to, expand this a little bit, but as I kind of looked at it, there's not much that I need to really tell you except that what is covered in this chart. And you can figure out a lot of this yourself if you go back and read these, and I hope that you do. There's even evidence going back to Sirach, which is one of the books that we have in the Bible, that there's a line in Sirach 49:10 that talks about the bones of the 12 prophets. So there's this long history of these books being put together in this nature. But again, we're talking about a close to 500-year span of when these are being written, and they're not necessarily in that order of when they are written. So in order in the Bible, which is what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at those 6 in the left-hand column, and then Noah will pick up with you next week on those final 6 in the right-hand column. So we're going to look at Hosea, we're going to look at Joel, we're going to look at Amos, we're going to look at Obadiah, we're going to look at Jonah, and we're going to look at Micah today. Let's just put these in the places that they go. So Hosea, you'll see, is falling in what is the Assyrian era. So it's the fall of Israel, so the northern kingdom is falling. So we've got some of that. So that's a contemporary then of Isaiah, which is important. So a lot of what is going on in the same areas that Isaiah, especially those earlier chapters of Isaiah, is the same sort of political sphere as what's going on in Hosea. For Joel, you'll see Joel is much earlier. We're looking at 850 to 800, somewhere in that range. So that's when both of the northern and southern kingdoms are still together. So it's one of the earlier writings that we have of the writing prophets, as we call them sometimes. Amos is in that same kind of category as Hosea. So we've still got both the northern and southern kingdoms. We're right at the precipice of where Israel falls, and we only have the southern kingdom. Obadiah, again, is very early. It's got that, the early writing prophets. It shares that nature with Joel. And we're looking at both kingdoms existing. So there's critiques of both Jerusalem, or of Israel and Judah, you'll see in these. Jonah, we all know Jonah. Jonah's kind of an outlier in these stories because it's really more of a narrative form. It's talking about the whale, that's right. So the story of whale. So it's almost like this giant call narrative of Jonah. So we often talk about all of these prophets share some sort of call narrative in which God has tasked them to do the work that they are being asked to do. And Jonah doesn't, he doesn't really want to, which I don't blame him. We've looked at a lot of prophets these past couple of weeks, and they don't have an easy job. And so this call narrative is kind of this fun story of going back and forth and of what God will do if you try to run from the work that God has tasked you with. And so it's different from the prophetic writing that we'll see, but there's certainly the prophetic element to it that is talking about what do you need to proclaim to Nineveh? What is this work? And this back and forth is really fun. And then Micah is falling right there after Israel falls. And so we've kind of got these early, all the way up into where Israel is falling, and then moving later into these other books. We'll look more at the Babylonian exiles and more contemporaries of Jeremiah and and Ezekiel, and then looking at the post-exile, post-exilic period as well, when captives return. So I thought that was a helpful little diagram. It kind of lets you put everything in context of where it is and what we will be looking at. A big piece that we will see in all of these books is this term that's kind of called the Day of the Lord. So the day of the Lord is this something that is yet to happen. It is in the future. But all of these kind of minor prophets, maybe not all of them, but a big piece of them is looking at this forthcoming day of the Lord, when the Lord will come to establish justice and to restore God's people. So that's this a notion that we'll see as we kind of look into these different prophets. We've got up here the illustration from Amos. So we'll get to that when we kind of get to Amos. But any questions right from this get-go before we jump into a little bit of each of these stories? Fantastic. Let's move on then. So let's go to Hosea. Well, that's the first one in our book of 12. Exit out of this, and we will pull up our fancy Bible reader here. All right. So this is about 14 chapters long, and we're going to have a large use of the metaphor again, so similar to Jeremiah and very similar to the patriarchal metaphor that that Jeremiah used. So if you remember, it's kind of this back and forth between, in Jeremiah, we're talking about this back and forth between Israel as the disobedient wife and God being the husband. And so playing with the broken structure of patriarchy to then let the male audience, who these are largely written to, suffer the consequences of what it means to be on the receiving end of this broken covenant. We're going to see that again in Hosea. So let's start maybe just with a little bit of reading this first chapter, because it sets it up. I wonder if someone might be so kind as to read. We've got our establishing paragraph here, like we say. We always like to have a paragraph or some words right at the start that tells us where we are. So we're contextualizing ourselves right here. Kings Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah of Judah, in the days of King Jeroboam. So we're talking about being right here in the northern and southern kingdom. So we've got both that are going on. So pick up right here at Hosea 1:2.
When the Lord first spoke to Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go take for yourself a wife of whoredom, and have children of whoredom. The land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, "Name him Jezreel, for in a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. On that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." She conceived again and bore a daughter. And the Lord said to him, "Name her Lo-Ruhamah, for I will no longer have pity on the house of Israel or forgive them, but I will have pity on the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow, or by sword, or by war, or by horses, or by horsemen."
And that we can stop there. It goes on for a little bit, and then we get to this restoration piece. But I think it's setting up here, and so there's some questions here of whether this is a historical telling of whether Hosea actually does go out and marry someone that society has labeled a whore, or whether this is part of building up the metaphor that, again, in this broken system of patriarchy, allows for folks to see the broken nature of covenant. So it's using the familial relationship as a way of talking about covenant. So it's going to do that both with Gomer. So there's long sections talking about Gomer, but it also gets into the father-son relationship. So this metaphor of the wayward son and the wayward child will come in the later pieces. But there's a lot going on here, and there's just some language that might seem jarring, but I think that's what prophets do, and that's particularly what metaphors do as well, is that they break open the world in a way, and you can see something in possibly a way that you hadn't before. So it's all about this call and this return. So let's take a look. This first 3 chapters of Hosea are talking about this marriage, so we'll see a lot of that language. But then we get to chapters 4. So if we jump there, we're going to get to more of this broken covenant language. So I wonder if someone would pick up for us here at the start of chapter 4.
Let me move up because
I can make it bigger too. Here we go.
okay, thanks.
Somewhere. Here we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep, there we go.
There we go. Okay. Hear the word of the Lord, O people of Israel, for the Lord has an indictment against the inhabitants of this land. There is no faithfulness or loyalty, and no knowledge of God in the land. Swearing, lying, and murder, and stealing and adultery break out. Bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore the land mourns. And all who live in it languish, together with the wild animals. And the birds of the air, even the fish of the sea are perishing.
There we go. We'll go a little further.
Okay. Yet let no one contend, and let none accuse, for with you is my contention, O priest. You shall stumble by day, the prophets also shall stumble with you by night, and I will destroy your mother. Interesting. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I reject you from being a priest to me. And since you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children.
All right, we'll pause there. This is hard.
Very harsh language.
Oof, don't make God angry, y'all, all right? So again, this is right at the fall of the Northern Kingdom. So there's lots that's going on geopolitically, and that's where prophets often thrive, is that there's so much tension, and we talked about this piece of assimilation or syncretism of people going to foreign gods, because that's part of the power structure in which allows them to stay alive and to stay in power. And so that's part of what the prophets are pushing back against, of the leaders going to these different gods of the prevailing authorities, so Assyria in this case, and basically commingling with the monotheistic traditions of the day. And so you see this pushback. And so God is clearly angry, but it always pushes towards restoration. So let's go to, lost my notes here. Let's go to 11. Here we go. If you can pass the mic on to somebody, and we'll pick up right here at the start of 11.
When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more I called them, the more they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk.
Pause right there for a second. Ephraim is referring to, it's one of the largest tribes in Israel. So when it's talking about that, it's using that synonymously with Israel. So continue on.
I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. They shall return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria shall be their king, because they have refused to return to me. The sword rages in their cities, and consumes their oracle priests, and devours because of their schemes. My people are bent on turning away from me. To the Most High they call, and he does not raise them up at all. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zebulun? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and no mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath.
We'll pause there. So it's this constant battle between what's going on in terms of, am I justified in destroying you because you have broken the covenant that you made with me? And the answer is yes. I can do it. I've thought about doing it. I've even plotted out how I would do it. But then it's this fierce turn, this almost whiplash of desire to restore the relationship. My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim. For I am God and no mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. And so this constant battle is so palpable in what the prophets are doing. Thoughts on this? For a little bit, yeah, certainly. Well, so yeah, and I think what we've talked about with some of what's going on in prophetic literature This certainly came into play with Jeremiah, but to what extent is God playing the long con here? To what extent is the restoration of Israel something that is going to be completed in God's time rather than in human time? And so that's one thing we have to take into account, because you will remember, if you look 500, 400 years past the point that Israel falls, there is this post-exilic period when there is the restoration of Israel, when the captives come back to the land, and where there's this new sort of identity that is brought up. So this idea of restoration and continuing the covenant, I think, is a lot longer than what we see in any sort of one human lifespan, and that's what we see in this as well. But that's a good point to make.
So, personal, pertinent to how we react
Right.
to others. We go through the stages of anger and revenge, and then we remember who we serve.
Yeah. Well, isn't it nice?
An understanding, hopefully fill in where the anger was.
Isn't it nice that when we're made in God's image, we can see that God has an anger streak too? But what God is capable of doing is tamping that and controlling it and saying that, yes, I'm angry, but the way to move forward with this is actually through love and grace and reconciliation and these powerful forces that exist within our lives, because God has shown us that example. But yeah, God gets angry. And I think we often get angry at the state of the world too. So how do we react to that, and what do we do with our own anger is a huge piece of what I think the prophets are talking to us about. Let's move on to Joel. We got to move fast today. There's lots in here, but we got 6 to go through. So, help me out, computer. There we go. So Joel is about 4th or 5th century. No, that's too early for Joel. But there's this, I wrote that note wrong. There's this a shorter book here. We've only got about 3 chapters, and the first chapter or 2 is really about lament. So this lament of the relationship, the lament of the fall, but also this idea of restoration. So maybe rather than anger, we're getting a little bit more lament here. So what does lament mean to you? Grief, yeah. A loss of hope. Oh, that's interesting. I like that. So grief, a loss of hope. Anything else? I think those generally cover it. So let's read just a little bit of Joel. Lament over the ruin of the country. Someone pick this up right here. Joel 1:2.
Hear this, O elders, give ear, all inhabitants of the land. Has such a thing happened in your days or in the days of your ancestors? Tell your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. What the cutting locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust left, the hopping locust has eaten. And what the hopping locust left, the destroying locust has eaten. Wake up, you drunkards, and weep, and wail, all you wine drinkers, over the sweet wine, for it is cut off from your mouth. For a nation has invaded my land, powerful and innumerable. Its teeth are lion's teeth, and it has the fangs of a lioness. It has laid waste my vines and splintered my fig trees. It has stripped off their bark and thrown it down. Their branches have turned white. Lament like a virgin dressed in sackcloth for the husband of her youth. The grain offering and the drink offering are cut off from the house of the Lord. The priests mourn, the ministers of the Lord. The fields are devastated. The ground mourns, for the grain is destroyed. The wine dries up, the oil fails.
So that's good enough for us today. There's there's a lot in there, but yeah, it's a little different from the anger that we see in Hosea. So there's palpable anger, and there's this destructive force that's kind of relayed through the prophetic voice. Where with Joel, it's more of a what was isn't anymore. What I did give you, you no longer have access to. And that makes me sad as God that you don't have access to these bounties that I have put into the world for you because of your inability to be with the covenant. So there's this deep lament that's going on here, and some really beautiful metaphor and poetic language that we have. It's also a response to plague. I mean, there's plague going on in this time. So part of the wrathful anger, certainly there's ways that could be understand that plagues are part of what God is doing to the world. I don't think we can see it in that way. I don't think that's a helpful way of looking at it. But you can certainly understand that in a time where plague is happening, there is this call to what was and how we did not give full thanks to what is going on. So let's get to some of the return stuff here, because that's some beautiful languages here. Someone pick up right here at Joel 3. We've got, the microphone's making its way around, so we'll just keep passing it.
For then, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people and my heritage Israel, because they have scattered them among the nations. They have divided my land and cast lots for my for my people, and traded boys for prostitutes, and sold girls for wine, and drunk it down. What are you to me, O Tyre and Sidon, and all the regions of Philistia? Are you paying me back for something? If you are paying me back, I will turn your deeds back upon your own heads swiftly and speedily. For you have taken my silver and my gold, and have carried my rich treasures into your temples. You have sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks, removing them far from their own border. But now I will rouse them to leave the places to which you have sold them, and I will turn your deeds back upon your own heads. I will sell your sons and daughters into the hand of the people of Judah, and they will sell them to the Sabaeans, to a nation far away, for the Lord has spoken.
Yeah, so some of this anger is now being poured outwards as well to the other communities, to the communities that in Israel and Judah's time of troubles have abused that power, abused their time of trouble. So some of these different communities. Joel 2:13 comes up a lot. So this is one that we see. This is certainly one we find in our I think this comes up in Lent. I'm not exactly sure, but I'll have to look. We certainly see it in our lectionary. But so yet even now, says the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting, with weeping, and with mourning. Rend your hearts and not your clothing. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relents from punishing. And then 2:28 comes up a lot as well. So let's look at that real quick. Then afterward I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Even the male and female slaves in those days I will pour out my spirit. So there's this beautiful language of reconciliation, of restoration that's going on, of this coming time. So again, this idea of the day of the Lord that is forthcoming, where this restoration is coming in. So that's just some of the more poetic language that we get in Joel. Any final questions on Joel before we got to move on to our next one? We got a lot to cover today.
Well, Ron, real quickly, did the people of the time accept this, or did prophets have to struggle for an audience?
That's a great question. I mean, part of what's hard to answer that without being there, I mean, we have a tradition that is handed down to us from time and time and time and time and time. And so often how these get written down isn't exactly clear. We talk a lot about the redaction, and we talk about editing. That was certainly evident in some of the major prophets. And so that's the question of, certainly it was well enough received that it was preserved and that this tradition is handed to us, but we don't often get a lot. So of in the time response to what the prophets are doing. You will see some of the later, if you're looking at just our biblical timeline here, there are books that reference to some of the earlier prophets. And so they're known and they are held in high regard. But the exact time that they are like speaking these prophetic words, it's hard to say. Jeremiah has a hard life, and he is constantly connected to the king and is bound to what happens to the king. And I just imagine in a room where you have to constantly be saying, yeah, you guys done messed up. That's not an easy job. So I think we can certainly understand that the nature of prophetic witness is a difficult one. To what extent people internalize it and work with it is a historical note that is much broader than we can really kind of grasp.
That's a good question.
I just looked at the timeline about Joel, and what you're kind of answering me already. So, is he partaking in God's ability to transcend time here? Is he speaking God's time transformations?
Yeah, so I think the difficulty with a theological perspective on these is we are using modern theological language to talk about what Joel might have understood, and I'm not sure that we can say that Joel's writing this with a perfectly conceived classical conception of God. All-powerful, all-knowing, existing in all time, which is one thing that we can critique that classical conception a lot, and there's a lot of theology that does that. But I think for most of us, that's an easy way to have a lens into this. I can't say, because I'm not Joel, what he was writing, but I certainly say how we understand the biblical canon and what is going on with some of these prophetic writings. And again, to Joanne's point about why are these writings here, is because they certainly spoke to people. They spoke to this idea of restoration and this deliverable of restoration. And I think that the history speaks to that as well, of there is this restoration of these communities in the long run of what happens. And so this faithfulness changes, but the covenantal faithfulness does not. And that's the important piece. So it's kind of hard to flip back and say, well, what exactly was Joel thinking? Because I don't know. But I certainly can say from our theological perspective in the modern age, we are looking at this in that sort of long run of saying there are pieces of this that are moving along and helping us understand what God is doing in the long stretch of history, in the long stretch of how God understands the world. So, let's move on to Amos. We're going to skip Joel or Jonah because we all know Jonah. You know that story. Go back and read it. It's a lot of fun. But I think that'll give us time in the next 10 minutes to get through at least 3 more. So we'll spend some time with Amos. Yes?
You know that a person was swallowed by a whale like last week or the week before. Did you all read that?
I read something about that. Yes. Goodness me. Well, yeah. Whew. So it's not something I want to happen to me, for sure. Let's go to Amos. I think similarly what we see with, so we have this image up here again, this, yet you did not return to me. So this is a big piece of Amos, of this constant refrain of, again, what we're talking about is a constant covenantal shift between the people of Israel, the people of Judah, and God. And so of this wayward nature in which the people go, and then this calling back of God and the refusal to come. And so that's a lot of what we see in Amos. So Amos is structured in a way of doing oracles. So you've got oracles against the nations, against Judah and against Israel. And that's the first two chapters. You also have, in the next 3 to 6, specific oracles against Israel. So oracles is a little different in some of the traditions that we have. So oracles are kind of like the actual prophetic things that I'm saying, this is going to happen to you. So that's what we think of when we say oracles. And then 7 through 9 in Amos are visions. But we've got this right here in chapter 2, yet you did not return to me. So some of the nations that are listed in the first 2 chapters are Damascus against Gaza, Ashdod, Tyre, Edom, Ammon, Moab. And so these are the nations that are lying outside of Israel. And so critiquing some of them, but then the wrath and the oracles turn against Israel and against Judah themselves in the later chapters. So looking at some of that. Yes.
Speaking about Gaza, when did this whole business start with Gaza Strip and Israel fighting?
That is well outside the scope of today's class, so we'll talk about that at a later date, but that's a good question. But you can certainly see that the tensions in the area are long-standing, and the history of the area is so deep, and so when there's conflict in the area, it is much larger than what is going on in the present moment. So that's a helpful reminder that this is thousands of years old, these conflicts that we're talking about. So thank you for that, Chris. So part of what is happening in Amos is this desire to show the special relationship that Israel and Judah have to God in comparison to what's going on with these other nation states. And so it kind of begs the question of, shouldn't this special relationship make the area immune to wrath and to anger? And the answer that Amos proposes is no, it doesn't. The special relationship that Israel and Judah have with God actually holds them to a higher standard. Let's look at 5. Yeah, so this is, you'll know this from MLK, from lots of liberation theology movements, social justice, civic rights, or civil rights here in the U.S. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. So there's this call that the standard for being in relationship with God is higher and holds you to a higher standard than it otherwise would for people that are not in relationship or not part of this covenant, are certainly invited into it. But to be in relationship with God means to be in a relationship that is loving and caring and is one where we let justice roll down like waters, righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. You'll see a lot of that in Amos. And so Israel's identity as a slave and at the same time as an oppressor is something that's happening too, because certainly where Amos is falling, we have some back and forth again with the geopolitical systems of which Israel is being used as a sort of puppet of the Assyrians, but also is oppressing others. And so what is the relationship that Israel has to hold? And it, of course, is a higher standard. And so that's part of what's going on in Amos. I wish we had more time to really delve into Amos, because there's lots of wonderful language in there. So I encourage you to go back and read that. It's 9 chapters, so it's really not one of the longer ones. And we're going to get to our shortest chapter here, too. Let's get to Obadiah here. Here we go. We've got 27 verses of Obadiah, and even we have 5 minutes, so we don't have time to read them all either. But Obadiah is specifically talking to Judah. So we are putting ourselves in the early period here, but it's talking and writing to Judah. So it's an oracle against Edom, which is the historical descendants of Esau. So if you remember back to Jacob and Esau, this classic struggle of birthright from coming from, who's their dad? Oh no, I'm having a blank. Jacob, thank you. Isaac, yeah. Jacob and Esau, Isaac is their dad. Thank you. So this struggle where kind of Jacob usurps Esau's birthright, even though Esau is the first one. We talked about this at a forum not that long ago. So go back and look at that story. But the folks of Edom, the Edomites are descendants of Esau, and so there's this long-standing division of what's going on between these two nations. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom, we have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations. Rise up, let us rise against it for battle. I will surely make you least among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. Your proud heart has deceived you. You that live in the clefts of the rock, whose dwelling is in the heights. So we've got this oracle against Edom. But then if we get down to 15 here, we have the Israel's triumph over Edom, Judah's triumph over Edom. For the days of the Lord is near against all the nations. You have done it. It shall be, as you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deed shall return on your own head. For as you have drunk on the holy mountain, all the nations around you shall drink. They shall drink and gulp down, and they shall be as though they had never been. But on Mount Zion there shall be those that escape, and it shall be holy. And the house of Jacob shall take possession of those who dispossessed them. The house of Jacob shall be fine, the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. They shall burn them and consume them, and there shall be no survivor in the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. So again, long-standing tensions of what's going on here. So all of these have to be put within their geopolitical context of what's going on in the time to really kind of get a sense of what's going on. So we have this long-standing sort of breakdown of relationship between Edom and Israel, and it's again a way of saying that the Lord is with Israel and is going to help them prosper even in this conflict. And so that's a short book. You can go read that. Let's get to Micah in the last 2 minutes of our time together today. We're going to skip Jonah because we've talked a little bit about that. So Micah is falling sort of in that same period as Amos and Hosea. So we're talking about likely past the fall of Israel. So we're looking at Judah. We've got oracles of judgment. 3 to 5 are talking about the Jerusalem's fall and the aftermath. And then there's this covenantal dispute language that is in chapters 6 and 7. So this is similar to what is going on in Isaiah and in Jeremiah. We've got some similar ideas. I think, if I'm right, yeah, here we go. This is the other piece of, that zoomed in a lot. This is the other piece of the St. John's Bible. So the two of the book of 12 that we have this morning. We've got this illumination from, oh no, stop doing that. Where are we in Micah right now? It's got to say somewhere, doesn't it? Got to be down in this corner. It's going to make me work for it. Chapter 6. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So That's falling right there in this language of covenantal dispute, which is again this theme that we've been working with the entire time we're talking about the prophets. But again, I think reflecting some of that language about what does it mean to be in relationship with God and what does it require of you, it actually requires a higher standard of you. So the Lord, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? So these ideas, these ways of being out in the world are certainly important. So that's part of what we get in Micah. And I have not done any of these justice, but hopefully you have a little bit of a lens that you can go back and read these. And I hope you do. The minor prophets, like I said, are no less important than the major prophets. They're just shorter, which actually means that you can go in and read them in a day or in an afternoon. You could read the whole book of 12 relatively quickly. They're not long, but there's some really powerful language in here, especially as it relates to metaphor and how we think about how we are existing in the world. So there's lots in there. I don't have time for questions. I'm so sorry. But Noah will pick up next week. So you'll look at that second column there, the last 6 of the book of 12, and he probably won't have time for questions either. But we're around if you ever want to ask us anything about the minor prophets. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in a little bit.